fed my sourdough starter this morning with 20 grams of original starter, followed by 60 grams of a mix of all-purpose flour and whole wheat flour and 60 grams of water. So I'm waiting for that to rise, and we'll start the whole process of making our cinnamon raisin bread. But in the meantime, I am going to get the raisins prepped as well as the paste that's going to be used in the bread. So the recipe calls for about 100 grams of raisins, and I use a mix of both dark and golden raisins. I love the taste of the golden raisins. For some reason, I find them to be a little bit softer. The reason why you want to soak these is because dried fruit will soak up the moisture in your bread. So by soaking them, you don't risk of having to extract moisture from your bread, and two, you want to make sure when they're soaked like this, there's less likelihood of the raisins burning and turning to a crisp when you bake your bread. So here are the raisins. They're gonna soak for about 15-20 minutes, and then I will use a strainer to strain the water out and then allow them to dry. They're not gonna get dried out like they when you started. You'll just get rid of that excess moisture, but they'll be nice and plump and moist when we go to add them into our bread. So this is the butter mixture that I'm going to use when I spread it out on my bread. And it is made up of about 55 grams of butter. Make sure your butter is unsalted and at room temperature. 60 grams of brown sugar, and 6 grams of cinnamon, and about 3 grams of flour. And I personally like to add just a little, maybe like a 1/4 teaspoon or less of vanilla. I find that that helps to kind of loosen it a little bit so that when I go to spread it on the bread, it goes on smoother and doesn't tear at the bread, because you don't want that to happen. Okay, so our sourdough starter is at the right spot. It's doubled, and it has beautiful air bubbles throughout. It still has a slight dome, although it's beginning to decrease. It has bubbles on the top. Now what I'm going to do to make sure it's ready to go is I'm going to do the float test, where I take just a little bit of the starter and I'm going to place it in some water, and it floats. So it is ready to go. And the process we're going to do, hopefully you can see that here, that it is floating on top, is fermentolase. So we're going to first do our water and our starter and mix that, and then we'll add in our flours, and we're gonna let that sit for about 30 minutes. So we're going to add 100 grams of our starter. And it's nice and thick. We're going to add 340 grams of water, and the water temperature is about 80-81 degrees. Now it's rather warm and humid here, so things are probably going to ferment quickly. So the important thing when it comes to working with sourdough, you can have your directions, your recipe, and that's great. But a lot of it falls into watching how your dough is reacting. If it's a warm, humid day, your dough is going to ferment and rise more quickly. If it's a cooler day, it's going to take longer. So this is something you have to keep in mind when you're working with sourdough. So like I said, we're going to add 340 grams of roughly 80-degree water. So we're just going to start mixing our sourdough starter and our water. Now the recipe actually calls for 350 grams of water, but I put 10 grams off to the side for when I go to add the salt, because when I add the salt and add a little bit of water with it to help dissolve, it just helps the salt to incorporate with the rest of the dough. And now we'll add the flour. So it's going to be 400 grams of bread flour and 100 grams of whole wheat flour that I will be adding. So now we're mixing it and it's going to become a shaggy dough. This recipe is a 72% hydration. You want to make sure you don't have any clumps in your flour. You want everything to get absorbed by that water. It doesn't mean you have to stir it till it's smooth. You just want to make sure that there's no dry bits of flour in your dough. So it's going to be kind of hard to stir a little bit. It's going to be shaggy, not very pretty, not smooth. Make sure you get all the clumps, because once that water and flour hits, this is when bulk fermentation begins. All right, this is when gluten development begins, when the water and the flour come together. So we're letting our dough rest for about 30 minutes. After it rests, we're going to add our salt and the 10 grams of water to help it dissolve. And we're going to mix that into our dough. And then after that, we're going to do a series of slap and folds. And slap and folds means we're going to take our dough, we're going to slap it up against either the counter or you can use your bowl. But the whole process for slap and folds is to help our dough absorb the water, introduce air into our dough, which allows for that open crumb that we see when we cut into our bread, helps with gluten development, and it makes our dough stronger. So in a few minutes, we'll be adding our salt and proceeding. So as you can see, our dough is a nice shaggy mess. Now I tend to add my salt a little at a time, followed by a little bit of water to get it incorporated into the dough. And I wet my hands slightly so that not to have the dough stick to my hands. And just mix it in. So we're gonna get the salt all mixed into our dough and follow it up with the slap and folds. Okay, so we're gonna take our dough and we are gonna do a series of slap and folds, putting it on the counter, lifting it up, stretching it out, and flipping it over. Scooping it, stretching it out, flipping it over. And we'll do this for about 3 to 4 minutes, no more than 5. And what you're going to do is see the dough transform to becoming smoother, which is already happening. Our dough is already becoming smoother. And this helps with the gluten development, helping to make it stronger, incorporating air into our dough, which helps with the development of those air bubbles that form. Okay, so you can see our dough is nice and smooth and it's beginning to take a shape. It's beginning to stay rounded. So now I'm going to put it back in the bowl and I'm going to allow it to rest for another 30 minutes and then we'll start the stretch and folds. And when I do the stretch and fold, that's when we're going to add our raisins. Okay, so our dough rested for about 30 minutes and now we're going to do stretch and folds. And in the process of doing this first round of stretch and fold, I'm going to add my raisins. So our dough has rested for 30 minutes, after which we did a stretch and fold to get all the raisins placed into the dough and kind of folded it into the dough so it's all covered within inside the dough and not any raisins on the outside. So given that, the best thing I found is to do not stretch and folds, which I accidentally may have said earlier, but to do coil folds, because the whole idea is we want to keep the raisins within the dough. We don't want them popping out. By doing the coil method, it gently allows the dough to aerate, and we strengthen it, but we don't do so in such a way that we're forcing the raisins to fall out, and then we're having to try and tuck them back in. So I'm going to wet my hands and gently reach underneath the dough, gently releasing it from the bowl, and then picking it up in the center, letting it kind of pull away gently, and then having it fold into itself. And that's the first coil fold. Then I'm going to turn and do the coil fold again. Same process, reaching underneath gently, lifting it up, allowing both ends to kind of droop, and then laying it down gently, folding over each other. Third set, same thing. Turn one more time, and this will be the last coil fold for this set. And you can see they're kind of not poking out, but it looks lumpy from the raisins. So that's why we want to be very careful and handle the dough gently so as not to cause any ripping from the raisins coming out. So I'm going to cover and put this to the side and allow it to rest for 30 minutes. Okay, just did the window pane test, and we can see through, so it has great gluten development. And now I am going to put the bread to the side and allow it to continue to ferment and rise, and I'm only going for 30%. And then I'm going to prepare it for lamination, but I'm going to take an extra step to make it a little bit easier to laminate when I go to add the butter and cinnamon paste. Now, because it's warm in my kitchen, it's about 74 degrees, the dough can rise pretty quickly, so I need to keep an eye on it. It's not a case of where you can put it off to the side and just assume it's going to continue its process of bulk fermentation for the next 3 hours, which if it's cooler, it would normally take, but it can actually go a lot faster. So I need to keep an eye on it to make sure I catch it, because I don't want it to go above really 30%, but at most 50, because the next step is getting ready for lamination, and it's better to have the dough kind of on the underdeveloped side rather than fully developed before doing that step. Okay, with this stage of making the raisin cinnamon sourdough bread, normally what some people do is after it passes the window pane test, you would spread it out if you were laminating, putting the butter spread over it, and then rolling it up, putting it in the Banneton, and then placing it in the fridge. But what can happen sometimes is, because of the warm temperatures of how warm your sourdough is, it can oftentimes spread but tear. So I thought this time I'd try something different, and that is, after I did the window pane test and after it reached 30%, I put my dough into the refrigerator to chill. And it's been in there for about 2 hours, and I just took it out, and I am going to stretch it out into a rectangle, and then I'm going to apply the cinnamon butter paste and then roll it up, put it in my Banneton, and then let it continue proofing in the refrigerator overnight. So this is what it looks like. It's kind of cold, and I'm hoping it's going to be a lot easier to handle than if it was at room temperature. So I have my dough spread out into a rectangle, and I'm going to apply the cinnamon butter paste. And I'm going to actually use my fingers than the back of the spoon because I want to get it nice and thin. But I'm going to leave a 1-inch border along the top and the sides, and then a 2-inch border at the bottom. And that is so that I have space to be able to seal the sourdough when I roll it into a loaf. It'll make it much easier to seal the ends together, therefore preventing the butter mixture seeping out. And that's also why in this mixture you add the flour, because the flour adheres to the butter, preventing it from melting to the point where you have it seeping out, which can cause scorching of your bread. So I just folded my dough one side over, the other on top of that, and I'm going to apply some more in the center here as well. Then I'm going to roll it up. Oops, got a little bit. If you see your raisins poking out, you can go ahead when you have it rolled up, kind of push them back in. But as we're rolling, they're folding back into the dough. And going up and over. I have a few raisins that I am pushing back into the dough. And then I am going to take the ends and I am going to seal them shut. Close that up. So my banneton is already set. Oops. And I'm going to lift the dough in, pinch some more. Make sure the ends are all closed, overlap the flaps, basically. Okay, so I'm going to do the stitch on my dough. Then I'm going to sprinkle some rice flour on it and cover it and put it into the refrigerator to proof overnight. So I look forward to seeing how this goes, and hopefully it comes out beautiful tomorrow. That's what sourdough is all about. You try different things. It may not come out looking pretty, but I'm pretty sure it's going to taste really good. So I will see you tomorrow morning when we go to bake the sourdough. Wonderful. And I just took the bread out of the refrigerator. It's risen a little bit more, but I think it's ready to go. I am going to put it into my Dutch oven where it's going to bake at 450 degrees for about 20-25 minutes. Then I am going to take the top off and turn the temperature down to 425. Now I'm going to check the temperature at that point to see where the internal temperature of the bread is. So if it is around 205 degrees, then I'm going to have to keep a close eye because it's baking quickly. And if it's getting too dark on top, I may have to tent it with foil. But I'm going to check it at the midway point because I don't want it going over the temperature of 212 internally. So let's get baking. Now when I go to use the lam, I do not go too deeply into the bread to score it. I just want to kind of go on the surface. And I'm not going to miss the bread or anything like that. It has enough moisture. So I'm going to put it into the Dutch oven, and it's ready to go. So unlike other breads that we make, with cinnamon raisin bread, it's not so much about the clock that you're going to follow. You're going to actually rely more on the temperature of the bread, how the bread looks, if it's browning too quickly or if it's developing a nice coloration to it, as to the amount of time you're going to have in the oven. The first 20 minutes, probably not an issue. It's the last couple of minutes, that last 15 or 20, that you're going to have to kind of gauge as to how it's going, because if you leave it in too long and it goes beyond that internal temperature of 212 degrees, your bread's not going to come out that good. You want it somewhere between 202 degrees and 212 degrees temperature. I'm going to personally shoot for around 210. Okay. It's looking pretty good, smells delicious. Has an ear forming, but it is splitting on the side, but it's still holding together fairly well. And I don't see a whole lot of seeping of the butter mixture to the bottom, just a little bit. So I just turned the temperature down to 425 from 450, and I put the bread back in the oven to bake for another 15 minutes, and then I'll take the temperature and see how it is. So I just put the bread back in the oven to bake for another 15 minutes with the top off. The temperature hadn't reached 202 yet, so it definitely can continue baking. And it looks pretty good. I did turn the temperature down from 450 to 425. So in 15 minutes, we'll see where the bread stands. Look at that. Oh, this is lovely. Look at that. Beautiful swirls of cinnamon. The raisins are all throughout the bread. Smells great. Awesome. I will say that taking the time to do the cold chill prior to laminating and then shaping the bread, I find that helped a lot. I've done raisin bread, cinnamon raisin bread, where it was at room temperature, and you go to spread the cinnamon butter paste and it's kind of tearing at the bread, the raisins are popping out, and you're working really fast because your butter is warming up, your dough of your bread is warming up, and it's tearing, and you feel like you're working against the clock. I find, as you can see here, most of the raisins are pretty much within the bread. As I've said, when I've made it, I've had the raisins all on the outside and they burn and they taste charred. They're all within the bread, which is nice. That's what you want to have. So I like this method. I hope you give it a try, and I hope it works. I'd love to know. So I'm looking forward to having a slice toasted with a nice warm cup of coffee, because it's rainy and cold here. So this is going to be a nice way to start the day. Thank you, and come by again so we can bake another loaf of bread.